Most people believe they already know the story of the Annabelle doll, a possessed toy locked away behind glass, handled only by experts. It sounds like something designed to scare you, something safely contained in the world of horror movies. But what if the real story isn't about a doll that moved on its own? What if it's about how easily people can be convinced that something harmless isn't? Because when you look closely at the real Annabelle case, the details don't line up the way most people think they do. The version most of us grew up hearing feels almost familiar, like something that's always existed in horror culture. A creepy porcelain doll with a blank stare, sitting still, but somehow watching you. But the real Annabelle wasn't porcelain. It wasn't even designed to be scary. It was a soft, smiling, Raggedy Ann doll, the kind you'd expect to find in a child's bedroom, sitting harmlessly on a bed or tucked into a corner. That contrast is where the story begins to feel uncomfortable, because it's easier to dismiss fear when something looks threatening. It's harder when it doesn't. Back in the early 1970s, the doll was given as a gift to a nursing student. She kept it in her apartment, shared with a roommate, living a normal life. No history of paranormal interest, no obsession with the occult, just a young woman, busy with school, trying to get through their routines. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then small things started happening. The kind of things you can explain away if you want to. The doll wouldn't be where they left it. Sometimes it would be sitting upright when they were sure they had placed it lying down. Other times, it would appear in a different room entirely. Not dramatically, not like in a movie. Just slightly out of place. Enough to make you pause. Enough to make you question your memory. And that's where the story becomes less about the doll and more about perception. Because memory isn't perfect. We all forget small details. We misplace things. We fill in gaps without realizing it. But when those small inconsistencies start repeating, something shifts. Doubt creeps in. Not just about what's happening, but about your own mind. The two roommates began noticing patterns. They would leave for the day, both agreeing on where the doll had been placed. When they returned, it would be somewhere else. Not always drastically different, but enough to feel intentional. Enough to feel like it wasn't random. At one point, they claimed to find handwritten notes around the apartment. Short messages. Childlike handwriting. Words like, "Help me." Neither of them owned parchment paper. Neither admitted to writing the notes. It's easy to hear that and immediately jump to a conclusion. Something supernatural. Something unseen. But there's another possibility that's harder to sit with. What if it wasn't the doll at all? What if it was someone or something influencing them in a different way? Because around this time, a friend of theirs began reacting strongly to the doll. He reportedly felt uncomfortable around it, insisting there was something wrong, something off. He claimed to have nightmares about it, dreams where the doll wasn't just an object, but something aware. Now here's where it gets interesting. Fear is contagious. You don't need proof for fear to spray. You just need suggestion. One person's discomfort becomes another person's suspicion. Suspicion turns into attention, and attention changes how you interpret everything that follows. Every movement becomes intentional. Every coincidence becomes meaningful. And once that shift happens, and just to be clear, this is the same apartment, the same two nursing students, and the same Raggedy Ann doll we were talking about earlier. Nothing has changed except what they started to believe. Later accounts describe visitors reacting strongly to the doll. Some reportedly felt uneasy just being near it. Others claimed accidents happened after they mocked it or didn't take it seriously. But again, there's no consistent evidence tying those events directly to the object itself. What there is expectation. If you walk into a room believing something is dangerous, your body reacts. Your mind becomes alert. You notice things you wouldn't normally notice. A sound feels louder. A shadow feels darker. Your heart rate changes. And when something happens afterward, even something completely unrelated, it doesn't feel unrelated anymore. It feels connected. That's how stories like this grow. Not through proof, but through reinforcement. And once enough people believe the same thing, it becomes something else entirely. A shared reality. There's also another layer people don't like to consider. Attention. The more attention a story gets, the more it evolves. Details become sharper, more dramatic. The unknown parts get filled in with assumptions that feel true, even if they aren't verified. Over time, the line between what actually happened and what people believe happened becomes almost impossible to separate. And that's exactly what happened with Annabelle. The doll you see in movies isn't the real doll. The story you hear most often isn't the original version, but the feeling it creates. That's very real. And maybe that's the point. Because fear doesn't need to be proven to exist. It just needs to be felt. Some skeptics have argued that everything in the original case can be explained. Misplaced objects. Suggestion. Group psychology. Even the notes could have been written by one of the occupants without realizing it. Or by someone else entirely. There's also the possibility of attention-seeking, whether intentional or subconscious. But none of those explanations are satisfying, because they don't give you something to point at. They don't give you a clear answer, and people don't like uncertainty. We prefer something we can define, even if it's unsettling. Something we can lock in a glass case and say, that's the problem. It's much harder to accept that the problem might not be the object at all. It might be how easily our perception can be influenced. How quickly a normal situation can turn into something else when just enough doubt is introduced. And that's where the Annabelle story becomes more than just a haunted object case. It becomes a reflection of something psychological, something human. Because if two people can become convinced that a harmless doll is moving on its own, if that belief can spread to investigators, visitors, and eventually millions of people, then what does that say about how we process fear? What does it say about the stories we accept as truth, and how many other stories are built the same way? There's one detail that often gets overlooked. The original owners didn't describe the doll as aggressive. They described it as unsettling, subtle. That's an important difference, because the most effective fear isn't loud or obvious. It's quiet. It's the kind that makes you second-guess yourself, the kind that doesn't give you a clear moment to point at and say, that's when everything changed. It just slowly builds, until one day you realize you're no longer comfortable in a place that used to feel normal. And by then, it's too late to go back to how things were. If you've made it this far, you're probably starting to see why this story doesn't fade like others do. And if you know someone who still thinks Annabelle is just a movie creation, send this to them, because the real story is a lot harder to explain than fiction. Even now, decades later, the doll remains in its case. People still visit it, still